Here's what I would love everybody to do. I'm a voice from above. I am not Jordan. I am Gleb. Some of you have attended the pitch session, probably know me. Here's what's going to happen. People are trickling in, and I understand many of you, well, for lack of a better word, are on the nerdy side of the spectrum. More developers, because Jordan is a very, very experienced developer. And so his view is going to be complementing what we had with Helen, who is a UX designer, very experienced designer. In fact, the two have worked together before, from what I know, so they know each other very well. Jordan is going to combine some of the elements that Helen has already brought forth, the value proposition elements, the business model canvas, but ultimately, this is going to be still focused on building products from a person who has the technical ability, not just to build a quick product in a hackathon, but also scale it for a massive amount of users. Jordan, I'd suggest we gently kick it off while people are trickling in. We have around 24 people joining this conversation, and it's going to grow probably to 60, 70, and so on. Jordan, it's your show. I'd suggest you kick it off.
Awesome. So feel free to let's designate Slack channel as well. For example, mentor help product management channel. So if you want to have a conversation with me, then we can do it there. Okay, thanks for joining the stream. And thank you for taking the weekend off to create an impact and doing something useful for the world. So as Gleb introduced, my name is Jordan. I've built billion-dollar companies like TransferWise. I was early employee, saw the scale into thousands and more of people, did a lot of hiring. And since then, I've acted as angel investor and worked with a bunch of startups as well. So currently, I'm CEO at Producement.com. So boom, if you ask a person how to get from an idea to MVP, which is usually a question that I ask in the interviews as well, then roughly, like you can think from the top of your head, what are the steps? But roughly, people usually have something like this in their minds. First, you do the customer chats. And if you are a fancy person and you like Steve Blank, then you call it customer discovery. Doing the customer chats, you're trying to understand the problems, the problem domain of the customers, and create a value proposition on how to solve this problem. Next, they would probably answer that, okay, so I know what's the problem of the customer, and I have a few value propositions lined up. Let's prototype it. Let's user test the prototype and iterate on it. If there is some kind of a success, some users are saying, okay, this is a product I would buy, then a good place to be in would be to get the pre-orders or letter of intent signed. Reminding again that let's chat in Slack, mentor help, product management channel. So how many of you know what the letter of intent is or letter of interest? Just wave in the channel or talk to me directly. For those of you who don't know, then okay, awesome. I see. For those of you who don't know, then basically letter of intent is something that you can establish with usually another business or a corporate customer, and they basically say that if you build the thing that is in prototype, then I will buy your product, or we can create a partnership. So if you have that, you are in a very, very, very good place. If you have a consumer product, then of course, pre-orders like Kickstarter, you basically try to validate that people will buy a product before building it. Once you have it, it's golden, you're good to go. You're going to build your MVP. Awesome. So in a hackathon context, how you are going to do it? I suggest you establish roughly like 3 tracks for our teams. The first track is the value proposition track, why and who would use the product. The second track is the user interface, how to deliver the product most effectively. And the third track is shipping, is the product feasible to build? So if you think about your hackathon experiences or even now what's happening, then try to allocate the things that you do, the activities that you do into these tracks. And now comes the important bit. Make sure you're doing all three of these things at the same time. So maybe you've been into a hackathon before and saw some teams that take, let's say, like 1.5 days just to work on the value proposition, and they don't even include the users in it. So that's a fail, isn't it? So let's divide your team into these three categories and making sure that people are working on the tracks. So we're gonna go basically deep into all of these three tracks, and there's just some additional data I want you to know about this as well. So let's talk about value proposition. There is a very nice reading, Startup Genome Report, that I recommend you to read if you haven't yet. It basically is a data-driven way on how to say which companies succeed and which companies don't. If you do angel investing or building startups, then this is the thing you should know. Like, this is the thing that makes your choices easier. Founders overestimate the value of their intellectual property before product market fit by 255%. Okay, a key takeaway here is that do not hesitate to pitch your product to anybody. As a founder, you probably are overly confident in your solution fit. What you need to do is to be very, very, very open with your ideas, not afraid to share them. Nobody's going to steal them. The intellectual property in an idea stage highly likely is not useful. So be open, don't be afraid to share and pitch around. Okay, so let's deep dive into creating a good value proposition. As I mentioned before, there's a concept of problem solution domain. You got to keep those two separate. So let's look at how to create a problem fit. Assess the severity and the pain of your problem. This is what you need to do. I think Helen went through this pretty well in her stages, but the idea is that you talk to a lot of customers and see if the customers are looking for solutions already. Are they willing to pay for a solution? Once you have enough of understanding about how the people feel about their works and the problems that they're having, that the pain is actually big enough, then only then it makes sense to start designing a solution. And keep in mind that there is a multitude of solutions. There can be 1, 2, 3, 100, 1,000 ways to solve the problem. So make sure you don't get stuck in the mindset of like, this is my fix for the problem. You have to iterate. Okay. So who and why would use your product? That's a pretty simple question with some complex ways to map it out. If you haven't yet used the lean canvas or business model canvas, then I suggest you take a look at it. It's a pretty useful tool. And once you map it out, you map out your business idea here. You basically can explain it to yourself, to your team, to the investors, or any third parties. The key things are: write down what you want to test. This is called key hypothesis. And write down the assumptions, the basis of your model. An example could be, let's say I want to build a flying car. What do you think? Not sure if it would help with the current crisis, but the hypothesis would be that people are willing to buy or want to buy a flying car. And the assumption could be that I can build an engine that is capable of flying a car. You got to map these out, and then we'll basically talk about testing them later. So again, mentioning the business model canvas or the lean canvas, if you Google it, you'll find it very easily. Go through it if you haven't yet. This will really, really help you explain the idea to yourself and your team and the investors. Also, if you're working on the value proposition, create 10 canvases and then pick 1 or 2 to work with. Awesome. Okay, so if you have any thoughts or comments this far, then just let me know. Cool. So how to gauge for interest? So let's say you have mapped out the business model canvas, or you have some kind of a value proposition aligned, then how to know if there are actually people interested in your product before building anything? A landing page MVP and collecting signups is a very, very common method. You can set up landing pages nowadays with like 10 minutes with landing page creators. And if a person sees that your value proposition is good enough, they will definitely leave an email. Creating communities on Facebook and social media will also allow you to validate if you basically shout out your slogans and your banners and you see people liking and gathering around them. For example, in the last hackathon that I actually participated, I was building a refinancing product, and there's no idea, like there's no point in building anything before you actually have this first traction queued, or people queued and aligned. So what we did was we just basically advertised a Google form where people could say the terms that they have in the current debt situation and how much money would they basically like to refinance. In a few hours, we got close to 100K refinancing requests. So we basically validated the first part of the need very, very quickly. So think about this. If you're building your product, how can you start the value proposition track early? Okay, cool. Surveys, sending out like surveys in Facebook or emails, gathering some kind of customer data, very good for gathering interest. And also the thing that you can do with it is basically, this is very cool. Like if you have a landing page and let's say 1,000 people visit your landing page and 50 of them leave an email, then you can start assessing the ballpark of your product's conversion. And conversion is basically, for those who don't know, then conversion is like the person is coming to your landing page and are they actually buying something that you're selling. So you get some kind of a, even before building anything, you get an indicator of how much money you need to put into advertising, for example. Like let's say your conversion baseline is 5%, then you can start calculating, okay, so in order to reach my goal of, let's say, like 10K users, then I would need like 100, 200K people to come to my landing page. And how much money would this kind of a traffic generation cost? Cool. So if you're running experiments, then experiment is not useful without knowing when it ends. And when you're building startups and doing the product work, you're constantly running experiments. So think about the experiments that you are currently running. These stem from the key hypothesis that we mentioned earlier. Think about the success and failure criteria. You don't want to get stuck in the zombie land. It's how they call it, basically, the companies who have no growth, but they don't give up either. So don't get stuck in the zombie land. Make clear exit criteria. Examples could be, you want to get to a conversion rate, like let's say the same example, you want at least 10% of your users to leave an email or be able to convert, because that will make your financials valid. And maybe there's absolute number of orders. Again, the Kickstarter example, like once you have, let's say, 1,000 people pre-ordered your product, you can build the assembly pipeline. So this is a very good success or failure criteria. Or maybe it's a big partnership. So think this through. Have you ever seen those teams who spend a year on doing something and they get to nowhere? It's all about speed, and startup equals speed. So don't get stuck doing something that has no success. Data drivenness. That's an easy one. And I suggest all of you to like maybe glance through the Lean Analytics book, but focusing on the metrics is important. And in a few slides, we will cover some of those as well. The idea is that your metrics should be comparative, understandable. It's usually a ratio, and it should be actionable. So take a moment and think about a funny metric that is not understandable for you. For example, the last funny metric that was not understandable for me was one team was trying to optimize happiness, people's happiness. It's super vague. You can't like measure the growth of happiness in ratios. How do you even define happiness? Like very vague. Okay, so good examples could be conversion, as we mentioned, growth, month by month growth, which means like, is your startup actually accelerating or not? These are all the things that VCs are actually looking at. If they see that you're a data-driven team, it's so much easier to raise money for you. So make it rain. It's just a reference of raising money. Okay, let's talk about conversion funnels just a little bit because it's such an important topic. How many of you know about conversion funnels already? Just wave in Zoom. Okay, awesome. There's quite a few people. Very nice. Okay, cool. Still for some to cover it. Well, a conversion funnel is, as I explained, when a person comes to your landing page and when they actually start buying or using your product and giving you profits or doing something useful, then you allocate this into steps. In each step, like in the first step, the landing page, a lot of people come in, and on each step there is some kind of a drop-off, and the guys who are using your product in the end, there will be like let's say 1,000 people come to the landing page and maybe only 100 or 50 will use your product. This will allow you to measure your value proposition. How useful is it? The user interface, like, do people get angry on your user interface and just close the browser window? And does your product even have an impact? This will allow you to predict your success, because the idea is that once you optimize your conversion, if you have a good funnel, then you can start pouring in with paid ads or whatever, any traffic. Like, let's say you convert 5% of users, which is like actually pretty good. Then you can start scaling your product, because you know that for every 10,000 people that you put into the landing page, 500 will become your users. So you want to be that specific with your product. Provide value early. Well, that's a simple tip. If you go to, like, let's say Trello or whatever, they don't ask you to sign up. You can directly start playing around with the cards and stuff like that. And only when you want to save something, you need to sign up. So make sure that you provide users get it as early as possible. The less steps, the bigger the conversion. So with each step, there is a drop-off naturally. Make sure that you have less steps in people getting to the payment or product usage stage. And you can figure out the conversion blockers. Like, this tool is something that startups use a lot. So I'm very happy to work with you specifically if you want to know any details later on. Okay, pricing. The value proposition part, like, how do you price your product? How valuable is it for the customers? You can do this by user testing, and you get some kind of an indication. And this indication should give you a rough estimate if you can make the economics work with a given value. Can you make people pre-order your product or get a letter of interest or intent, sell the prototype, as you mentioned? So it's important for sustainability. This is also something that VCs will be looking for, definitely. Economic model. So the easiest way, again, is to talk to users, show them the prototype, ask them how much are you willing to pay for this. Virality and word of mouth. Does anybody have heard of these concepts? Please wave to me in Zoom. Okay, a few. Okay. So the idea is that if you need to pay to grow your product, then your product will grow. The growth cost of your product is massive. For example, if we build TransferWise, unheard of there was 50% of people came to our product via word of mouth. This means friends were recommending the product to their friends and family. And this is unheard of for a fintech product. So let's see how we can get there. You have to have a strong foundation, which means sufficient levels of satisfaction, going through those iterations and user testing and getting customers committed and actually excited about your product. We did a lot of controversial advertising. For example, I was running around in London naked, like half naked, of course. I had my pants on. That was a big publicity stunt. Then I was using a bath gown in another campaign. Like this kind of guerrilla marketing worked very well for us. And of course, there's direct management. Like if you put ads on the tube and doing targeting advertising and stuff like that. But when it comes to word of mouth and recommending, like people recommending products to each other, think for a moment, like when did you last recommend a product to your friend? I think the last time I recommended a product to a friend was it was an online shop that I thought had really good quality products. And the idea is that when every person that comes to your site recommends to at least one other person to come to your site or use your product, then you're in a good place. Your virality coefficient is greater than 1. This means your product will grow exponentially. You'll have like 100,000, 10,000 million users pretty quickly. Kind of like the exponential growth of COVID-19. I think it's pretty accurately describes the virality thinking. If your virality is below 1, you need to invest into marketing. That's not as good place to be. Cool. So summary on the product building, or one of the like biggest lessons I think is don't forget to pivot. And the data is that startups that pivot once or twice raise 2.5x more money, have 3.6x better user growth, and are 52% less likely to scale prematurely than startups that pivot more than 2 times or not at all. So that don't get fixed in your idea. Make sure you pivot, and we'll talk about premature scaling a little bit more later. Okay, so the first track was about value proposition. The second track is UX. I think you've had a workshop already, so I will go through it like pretty quickly.
Just to build on the previous point, what pivots did you do early stages of TransferWise? Your first question has been asked.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so that's easy. So TransferWise started out like, okay, so the idea is pretty cool. So TransferWise started out by people needing to send money between UK and Estonia. And the first platform that was built was basically an exchange. Like people could match the sums of money, and it had some traction, but not that much. Like eventually we figured out like, come on, people don't want to like swap money with each other. They want to send money. So that was like a major pivot that we learned pretty early on, pretty quickly. I'll share some of the other cool like manual operation stories before that we did at TransferWise as well, or how TransferWise basically started. Thanks for the question. So UX. The quote is, startup needs 2 or 3 times longer to validate their market than most founders expect. This underestimation creates the pressure to scale prematurely. So basically, premature scaling is when founders get fixated with an idea and they just like raise money to that specific solution. And you got to remember that VC money is like rocket fuel. Once you raise the capital and you have chosen the direction, the rocket takes off. So raise money when you have like pretty good validation about your product already. And the statistics just demonstrates that people are not too open-minded. The last product we built, for example, with a very cool AI negotiation company, we created a version of the product which was mobile app based. We threw it away in 2 weeks, and then created another iteration which was for another segment of customers solving the same problem. So this is the kind of mindset you have to have, killing the babies. Cool. So what are the tools that you use in UX? Prototyping, of course, as we mentioned. How does the user engage with the product? Got to remember that the prototype is a device for learning. A bunch of good tools out there like InVision, Figma, Prod.io, etc. Super important to iterate on the copy and messaging, as people don't may get confused in with simple words like, let's say, try to think along. What are the words that are confusing for you in a certain domain? Not in a domain that is you are expert in. Let's take finance, for example. Interbank rate. What the heck does that mean? Okay, let's take even a simpler one, refinancing. A lot of users don't understand what refinancing is. They get scared of fancy words. They close the window. Instead, you might maybe want to say getting a better deal for a credit or whatever domain you are in, like medical domain, very complex. Make it simple. And like just a note that the prototype could of course be, if you're building like a technical product, the prototype could just be API specifications or mock API that gives out mock data. It's important to get to the learning point and actually show it to the users. And the user testing, which Helen covered already. Super important. Like all 3 tracks should be covered with user testing. The value proposition, the UX, and the building the product itself. So find user testers from day one. You can do it in a guerrilla style. We've often just can't do it now, but we often just go to restaurants and start conversations with people and ask them to use our product. You can find user testers via Facebook or forums or friends or recommendations or any other way. It's important to get them lined up from the day one. If you haven't yet done so, just set up like 10 calls in a row and start iterating on your value proposition and UX as well. Usually a handful of users is enough. 4 or 5 users are enough for an iteration. Then you go back, change something, and do new iteration, talk to new people. Don't explain anything. This is, I think, obvious tip. The ones who have done user testing, but the idea is that if a user asks a question, you want to observe them in their natural habitat. So don't answer their question. Just write down what they wrote, how their emotions were, what kind of reactions there were, and say, okay, thank you. I wrote down the question. Maybe you try to figure out or what you naturally would do, how to solve a problem you're currently having. Okay, so that's enough about UX. Remember to iterate. Founders that learn are more successful. Startups that have helpful mentors, track metrics effectively, and learn from startup thought leaders raise 7x more money and have 3.5x better user growth. Boom. Well, if that's not motivating, then what is? You got to learn in order to make it, and 7x more money sounds pretty good to me if you're just starting a startup. And investors are definitely looking into the pivots that you already made. Can you bring them customer learnings? Remember this word, like if an investor or any stakeholder asks you, what are your customer learnings this far? You should be able to talk through the stuff that you already learned, ideally in metrics. So shipping. So last bit of the last track that we're talking about, shipping the product itself. So premature scaling is the most common reason for startups to perform worse. They tend to lose the battle early on by getting ahead of themselves. This again is a reference to don't build anything unless you're certain that this will be useful. Don't invest money into like hiring a big team or invest money into building a product that is not properly validated. So in my career, like I constantly meet startups that I again and again, my answer to them if they talk about raising money or building something together is you have to go through the validation phase, the simple stuff first. Show me the traction that you have without any product. Like show me the amount of users that are willing to use your product, or have you had, do you already have like 100 people lined up who want to use the product that is in your mind? Cool. So how to ship stuff? You got to prioritize. What is prioritization for you? How do you create the priorities? Is it like one guy in the team just says this is important? So basically all of our teams need to label every user story or every feature according to customer impact and effort. The customer impact part can be, for example, amount of users that are used are affected by a feature, or amount of users who are affected by a bug, or amount of users who are requesting a feature. Very good way to prioritize. You can put that into money as well. Like if we have this kind of feature, it would make us X amount of money. And effort is obvious. The engineering team will give their best guesstimate, probably in complexities or something like that. You got to understand how the feature affects your KPIs. If you don't know the customer impact, easy, don't do it. If somebody from your team comes and says that let's create this red button here, or let's paint this button in another color or something like that, if they can't give you a customer impact assessment, then don't do it. Work on the things that really matter. Remember, startup equals speed. So obviously you do the stuff that is high in impact and low in effort, and you don't do the stuff that is high in effort and low in impact. Okay, so this is obvious for all the engineers. Kudos to the engineers out there. Use out-of-box tooling. Use convention-based tooling to get started quickly, like landing page generators, for example, where you can create a landing page in 15 minutes. Design frameworks like Bootstrap. If your designer comes to you, then it's easy to basically early on tell them, okay, let's use some kind of a framework, and then designer can work with the colors or whatever. Infrastructure cloud providers, AWS, Google Cloud makes life so much easier. In the beginning, you don't even have to pay for it because the traffic is so low. What we always do is set up continuous integration from the beginning, especially if you have multiple teams, then there's no need to manually deploy or synchronize the team's work. You just set up the pipelines, and whenever some code is pushed into a branch, like a master branch or merged, then the product will automatically update in the production environment. All of these things will allow you to onboard new members into the team quickly. Think about if you hire an engineer or take a random person from the street, how quickly can they onboard to your stack? Super important question. Also making the buzz factor lower. So mechanical turk operations. So there's a cool story about mechanical turk. How many of you know this? Raise your hand in Zoom. Okay, there's 3 guys. Okay, so I'll tell the story. So there was this royalty who was traveling around with a box who could play chess, and with a person, and the box who could play chess had some kind of cogs and interesting things in it that the royalty showed to people sometimes, and people kept asking, how does this box work? And the guy just kept telling like, well, it's my trade secret, you know. When he died and the box was opened, then they indeed discovered that the box was empty. And actually who was moving the chess pieces that were supposed to be moved by a machine was a human inside a turk. So, for example, at TransferWise, before automating a lot of operations, We just hired some people to do it manually. Once we saw that there is actual growth with a current feature or some currency route or whatever, only then we automated it and the people could move on to work on something more brainy. So focus on the front end. What you build is the tool to test with, and do the operations in the backend manually if you can. Services like turk or freelancers or anything like that. A good example is maybe a recent startup wanted to build a marketplace, and an obvious way to do a marketplace before building anything is, at least that was my advice, and we got it rolling as well, was you call to the participants of the marketplace, you create a spreadsheet, and you try to map the participants of the marketplace manually. Or you can even use a Google form where all of the people see the entries themselves and can match themselves manually. And only when you see some kind of traction going on, you start building a product around it. So you got to be clever. You can be clever in like creating pitch decks or raising money, but it's difficult to be clever in building product itself. So that's a good example. And only start automating when you need to scale. Cool. So now the last bit in the techie stuff, which I think is close to the engineers listening in, is the stability and the speed trade-off. So what studies show is that actually there is no trade-off necessary. Stability equals speed. Of course, during a hackathon, you might cut some corners, but if you're talking about a project that is like 2 weeks, 2 months, half a year or 2 years, then stability equals speed. So there are 4 key metrics in a multi-year research published in Accelerate, which is a good book to read, demonstrates a direct link between organizational performance and software delivery performance. The researchers have determined that only 4 key metrics differentiate between low, medium, and high performers, which basically means how much value can the team provide to the users, how quickly and how useful features are being delivered. Cool. Yes, I will share the presentation later as asked in the Q&A. So 4 key metrics. Lead time. Of course, I think this is the most important one. Time from code being committed to being used in production. So you can do this by enabling the pipelines pretty early on, automated pipelines. Deployment frequency. High performance release code multiple times per day, releasing changes and learning. So again, back to the iteration, pretty simple. If you don't release changes, you're not learning because you're not getting customer feedback. So nowadays it's very, very easy to set up kind of environments for products where your teams release multiple times a day, which is the norm now. Because if an engineer releases a code and they can't actually they have this problem in their head that they basically solved and they can't get immediate user feedback for it, then they cannot basically close the problem in their heads. And maybe if it pops, like you release the code only like 3 days later and the engineer sees feedback for their work, then it's a little late because the problem has already evaporated from their heads. So releasing as soon as possible will help people to work much more effectively because they're constantly learning. So 2 less important in a hackathon scenario is mean time to restore, how quickly can you recover from a failure, and the change fail percentage. Well, if there's a service impairment, or let's say you ship a feature or do a release, if 9 releases go okay and 1 release has a bug or some kind of a feature that was incorrect in it, you need to roll back, then you're in a good place. If you already have like 2 buggy releases for every 10 released, then that's not a good place to be in. Awesome. So remember this, your people equals your product. The brains that you have in your team are the brains who are creating the product. Balanced teams with 1 technical founder and 1 business founder raise 30% more money, have 2.9x more user growth, and are 19% less likely to scale prematurely than technical or business-heavy founding teams. So think if you have the competences in-house and if there is a communication happening between those competences as well. Very, very, very important is who you hire into your team. When I build startups or any companies, then I treat building the product with the same priority as hiring people, because this is the only way you can basically scale a company, by hiring very good people and then letting them do their best. So the key takeaways for a hackathon: work in parallel with all of three tracks: value proposition, UX, and engineering. Iterate and user test on all fronts. Once you have something done engineering wise, show it to the users or show it to the team next door or whatever. Once you have anything done like that looks like a prototype in UX, start showing it to the users from day one. If you have a value proposition, some canvas or some kind of a slogan ready, share it with people, see how they react. Establish the success and failure criterion. You don't want to get stuck into the place where there is no growth, but you keep investing in it. Remember, there is this sunken cost fallacy. Like if you think like, I've spent half a year on something and I shouldn't give it up, then that's a sunken cost fallacy. That actually every day you need to decide again, is this product worth my time or not? And remember that stability equals speed. If somebody tells you like you need to cut corners, then talking to the engineers here, then remind your team that you don't need to cut corners. If you're going to stick with the product for at least a few weeks, then it's okay to spend some time in writing unit tests and setting up the pipelines and all of that stuff. And remember, create an impact. Be vision driven. Most successful founders are driven by impact rather than experience or money. This again is Startup Genome Report finding. Thanks for taking part in making the world a better place. Feel free to reach out at jordan@producement.com and have a wonderful experience. I'm available on Slack or in the emails.
Jordan, thank you once again. What I would love to do is that you repeat the key channel where you're going to be monitoring and answering questions. Could you please repeat that or show it to us just in case?
Yes. So this is the Mentor Help Product Management channel. Let me see if I can share it with you. This is the channel, Mentor Help Product Management.
Understood. And Jordan, may I share that link to SlideShare with people once again?
Yeah.
Just to be very good. I'll post this in the chat below so everyone can access it. It's also answered in the Q&A, but I'll do this. So ladies and gentlemen, Mentor Help Product Management. I see Alvin already reaching out to you. This is very good, Alvin. I wish there will be more people reaching out to you, Jordan. Thank you very much. If there's anything you would like to leave people with, great. If not, I'm going to post the link and I'm going to gently end this chat. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, guys. Create an impact. Bye-bye.